Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us at Disability Rights California's Peers Advocating for Rights and Recovery, presented by our Peer Self-Advocacy Program. Just some logistics to start off. We do have ASL interpreting and captioning available for this presentation, so you can check your view settings on the top right-hand side of your screen. You should see our interpreters are pinned. For captions, please direct your view to the middle bottom part of your screen and click on the CC button for captions. If you're joining by phone, please mute your phone. The chat will not be active, but comments placed in the Q&A will be reviewed after the panel's presentation. So I'm Robin. I'm with the Peer Self-Advocacy Program. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a person with lived experience with mental health disabilities, and I've been at DRC for quite a long time, for 23 years with the Peer Self-Advocacy Program. So I'm glad you're here today to hear from our panelists. Just to tell you a little bit about the Peer Self-Advocacy Program, or PSA, we present workshops and facilitate self-advocacy groups in locked psychiatric facilities and in the community. We teach peers about their patients' rights and help them develop skills to advocate for themselves and their own needs and goals. Self-advocacy is different from what we call systemic advocacy. So in this case, systemic advocacy is advocating for our rights as a community and to improve the effectiveness of the mental health system. Today, we will have a panel of dedicated and passionate peer advocates who will focus on systemic advocacy. They are all members of our peer coalition, Peers Advocating for Rights and Recovery, also known as PARR. Several years ago, we realized that peer-run organizations, which are nonprofits, had not been working and collaborating together. Since most of their funding comes from the counties, the peer-run organizations have to compete for the very limited funding that is available. Due to recent legislation, they face significant cuts to their funding, which jeopardizes their ability to continue providing services to our peer community. So to bring together peer-run organizations and individual peer advocates, we formed a peer coalition, PARR, to collaborate and advocate for legislation and programs that would benefit the peer community. Our main goal is to advocate for voluntary, community-based, peer-driven, recovery-oriented, and culturally responsive treatment programs and services as alternatives to forced treatment. So now that we have the opportunity to hear from our three panelists, who are all members of PARR, who will tell you more about why advocacy is important to them, share some of their own stories, and describe some of their peer advocacy efforts and activities. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Paul Simmons has worked in the nonprofit sector since 1991, including several mental health associations. He worked with Rusty Seelix, the preeminent mental health advocate in California, and co-author of Proposition 63, which is also known as the Mental Health Services Act, which has brought billions of dollars to the mental health services field. Paul worked with the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, or DBSA, as a community engagement specialist and executive director to revitalize mental health services in California. Paul was a primary advocate in the campaign against Governor Newsom's Proposition 1, which reduced billions in funding from mental health services. He now serves on the board of directors of California Peer Watch, which is an advocacy organization representing the interests of the mental health community. Next, we'll be having Katherine Wolf, who's our second speaker, and she is a doctoral student with mental health and physical disabilities in the Sustainability and Health Equity and Disabled Ecologies laboratories in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at the University of California at Berkeley. So she brings a very unique view to us today. She conducts research at the intersection of environmental health and disability studies with a particular focus on health facility sites in California. Our final speaker is Emily Wu Chuang, who's an award-winning Taiwanese American mental health advocate and grief artist for trauma-informed care, harm reduction, and systemic change. She learned to channel her grief energy into various art forms, such as singing, writing, dancing, playing the piano, and being a fashion statement for mental health in green and the LGBTQ movement in rainbow. As you can see, she's very colorful. Identifying as a suicide attempt survivor, sexual assault, and psychiatric survivor, She serves as a peer resilience coach, inspiring others to tap into their own inner strength. Emily was invited to speak for Congresswoman Grace Napolitano, TEDx, Yale, and USC, and was also featured by the California mental health movement when it was called Each Mind Matters. She serves as the first Asian American board member for the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. She was also named the 2024 AAPI Community Champion by former Senator Anthony Portantino. Her advocacy, creative expression, and dedication to community healing inspire many to transform their own pain into beauty to share with the world. So first, we're going to start off with Paul. So why don't you go ahead, Paul?
Thank you. Boy, Emily has an amazing resume. I'm afraid to even say anything after that. That's just amazing. Anyway, yeah, thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. You covered some of the basics of what I've done. I've been started in the nonprofit world in 1991 in education, actually with the community colleges and the faculty association, actually, of California community colleges. And was there for 14 years and thought that I'd be in that education world like forever. During that, I mean, I worked with several of I've been really blessed over the years to work with some of the top advocates in the state. Patrick McCallum was the executive director there. After that, I did a number of other nonprofit associations with multi-association management firm advocacy, excuse me, and advocacy, and that was with, that's where I really got into the health field in terms of advocacy and whatnot. You know, in the early days, I served a lot of different functions related to advocacy, but really didn't do direct advocacy. So I would report on the advocacy work that we were doing, do edited, spread the word throughout either the campuses or the communities that I was working with, but really didn't get into direct advocacy until, as you mentioned, I went to work for Rusty Seelix, where I became sort of a legislative assistant there, did some analysis, although my analysis was really shallow compared to Rusty's work. And but I kind of cut my teeth in terms of direct advocacy, in terms of writing letters to legislators and that sort of thing. I guess I should mention with FAC, sort of as an interesting historical thing for me was I realized, well, probably about 2 or 3 years ago that in the 1990s, I was at a meeting for the Faculty Association, and I happened to meet Willie Brown and Kamala Harris together at that moment. And so it was kind of looking back on that, I said, hey, I was there when those two were kind of a thing. So anyway, that's interesting. So anyway, went to work with Rusty. Now, Rusty at the time was executive director of several organizations and sort of coordinator of a lot of the different organizations, which MHAC, Mental Health America of California, CCCBHA, which is now CBHA, although they may have changed their name again by now. So I really got a broad experience in a lot of the different aspects of advocacy and of the mental health community. We worked with Cayenne as well, which was a program, I believe, at the time. But there were a number of different organizations, so I think I got a fairly good sense of that. Before that, I never really thought of myself as a peer, but the more I got involved with DBSA, Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, I realized that I had so much in common with peers that I never just really thought about it. But hey, I'm a peer. I have lived experience. I have multiple diagnosed and obviously undiagnosed issues that I've dealt with over the years. So when Rusty retired and unfortunately passed away way too early, DBSA was the organization I was working most with Rusty, and I sort of took the helm of that first as a volunteer, then as executive director, working with the national organization as well. So that's really when I started taking real leadership in terms of the mental health community, and it's just been a joy ever since. We did a lot of legislative work. I think that with particularly with John Vanover, who's also a member of PARR, we worked together to really gain a place in the state's legislative arena where people would actually call us rather than just knocking on doors of legislators or writing letters. But when someone was putting together legislation, they would start calling us and say, well, you know, what's the peer voice on this? Our few very good friends were very good with reaching out to us. Now, of course, that mostly ended when the governor started taking the reins of mental health and doing a lot of things with mental health in terms of care court, in terms of Prop 40, or not Prop SC 43, and of course this most recent effort that culminated with Prop 1, which pretty much, well, in many ways, it really decimated the goals of the original Prop 63, which of course Rusty was I guess the man behind the curtain. Yeah, he basically wrote it, even though the author was Steinberg. So anyway, I've had the opportunity to work a lot of people over the years in this. I think that Prop 1 really, that campaign was something that I never thought I'd be like in the media. I was never really a media person. I would write, I would edit. I've always been a very good editor, but maybe not quite as great good a writer. But in terms of being in front of a camera or something, that was never me. Yes, I was trained as a musician and I've performed, but I've never really felt comfortable in the public eye until then. And I realized that if you kind of know what you're talking about and you're really passionate, you can do it. So anyway, after Prop 1, or actually when the Prop 1 campaign came about, that was about the time that DBSA California was reorganizing and basically got rid of its entire professional staff. So I was a volunteer throughout that process, and when Prop 1 was finally passed, we decided that Peer Watch was something that we should do because we really needed, as Robin mentioned, 501c3s have done a lot of work, but there are some things that 501c3s couldn't do. And we realized with Prop 1 that being too active or too political was a danger to 501c3s, both institutionally, but also in terms of funding, as many organizations found that opposing the governor on some of these issues really put them in a place of danger in terms of their funding, and did experience some significant cuts. And we're still seeing some of the results of that. So Peer Watch was organized as a 501c4 so that we could be a little bit freer with our advocacy. We don't take money from government, so we don't have to worry about our government funding, which is rather nice. But anyway, California Peer Watch was really, it's less than a year old now. And we're still really getting our feet wet in terms of getting the exposure that we need to have and developing the kind of reputation that some of the organizations have developed as well, but in a slightly different format. And so I'm enjoying doing that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us. There are many battles ahead. Most of the battles behind have not been as successful as we've liked, but we are really hoping to move forward in a more proactive way in this new 501c4 situation. I've probably hit about the end of my time. I feel like I've been talking forever, so let's move on.
All right, thanks so much, Paul. And so everybody knows Paul's played trumpet in his free time. He's been playing for a long time, both in symphonies and jazz bands and so on. So he's a great musician also. So thanks, Paul. So now we're going to hear from Katie. So why don't you share some of your advocacy experiences and efforts and your personal experience. So go for it, Katie.
Sure. I'm really honored to be here. I'm the newest to California advocacy of the three of us, so I'm really honored to be here. Why is advocacy important to me? I've always been interested in I'm trying to figure out a way to put this because the way I actually say it is a little vulgar, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on here. I've always been against involuntary exposures to toxics, right? And so whether that's environmental pollutants or whether that's substances that someone doesn't want injected through a syringe. And so I'm always thinking about power. And so even though like a lot of my degrees are in, public health and environmental science, I do see this parallel between environmental health issues where people are involuntarily exposed to pollutants and the involuntary psychiatric system where people are involuntarily exposed to confinement and often forced medication. So I was lucky enough to find, in my doctoral program, some labs that were interested in the intersection between those two worlds, which is very interdisciplinary and a little bit weird. So my own kind of journey started, I started identifying, I only learned the word peer like maybe a couple of years ago, and really through Disability Rights California and PARR, honestly. But I've had mental health challenges for a long time. I actually was hospitalized in college and took a leave of absence from college for a while. So if anyone else has had, that experience, I can tell you, you can have an academic career after a leave of absence for mental health. Yeah, so it's been, decades probably that I've struggled with mental health. And then I started getting involved in advocacy on these issues in California for two separate reasons. One, I started dealing with kind of additional chronic illness issues maybe like 5 years ago. And I was dealing with the medical system suddenly a lot and seeing doctor after doctor. And I was really struck by the power dynamic in a lot of those interactions. And I was really disturbed, honestly. I'm really going to get myself in trouble here, but I was really disturbed because I was like, okay, I'm like a white woman with 2 Yale degrees and I can't get doctors to take me seriously. Like there's no hope. Like this is bad. Then like, so I was like, okay, there are some really important issues here that we need to figure out. Like they're not taking me seriously, they're not taking anybody seriously because I have a lot of power. And then at the same time, I was just happened to be having lunch with a dear friend of mine, and they said, "Have you heard about this Orwellian thing called care court?" And I was like, "What in the name of 1984 is this?" And I looked it up, and it was as disturbing as I thought it. It was even more disturbing than I thought. And I was like, "Oh, they're using care to mean force." And something about that just turns my stomach. And so in disability studies, there are these two authors that I really like. I've got them here so I don't miss them. Miranda Fricker talks about epistemic injustice, and then Ms. Price talks about loss of rhetoricity, Margaret Price. And so it's kind of this idea that like who you are and where you are in a system of power determines like whether your knowledge makes it to the forefront or gets taken seriously. That's kind of epistemic injustice, a poor definition of epistemic injustice. And loss of rhetoricity, Margaret Price describes as this phenomenon where once someone perceives you, particularly to have a mental health disability or a psychosocial disability, they no longer take you seriously. They no longer perceive you as a valid reader of your own experience, right? As a valid witness of your own experience, right? So in a lot of contexts, like experience is seen as a plus, right? Or perceived as a plus, I should say, right? Like, and it should be, right? But particularly in the area of psychosocial disability or mental health disability, like sometimes like a lot of people view lived experience is a minus, right? That you're a less reliable witness of your own experience if you have some kind of mental health diagnosis. Someone even perceives you to have a mental health diagnosis. And that just fills me with rage. And so that's probably my main motivation for advocacy, is just I believe people are the best witnesses of their own experience. I believe the best way to understand a system is from the bottom of the power hierarchy in that system, right? That's actually, I think, the best vantage point on a system is from the bottom of the power hierarchy of the system. And so that's why I'm really interested in peer advocacy, because I think it's critical. Let's see. Some of my own stories, experiences. So I got started, if folks are interested in getting involved in systemic advocacy, I kind of started on my own after I had lunch with my friend. I started writing letters to the legislature, and then I just started showing up in person at hearings. In part, I was struggling in my doctoral program, and I wanted to do something that felt meaningful outside of it. And this felt really meaningful and urgent. I think Care Court, I think I started going for like the late, when Care Court was about to pass. And I just started meeting other people because they would see me, giving what we call yes and, testimony. They usually, if you've ever advocated for the legislature, they usually give 2 witnesses on each side 2 minutes to speak, and then everyone else can come up and say their position in the name of their org. And so I just started meeting people because I was showing up. And then I think it was somehow, Deb Roth at Disabilities California got a hold of one of the letters I had sent that mentioned a lot of the international legal context on some of these involuntary involuntary commitment laws that have been passing in California over the past 5-10 years, and which wasn't a perspective that had made it into other advocacy letters, but still to this day just shocks me that the World Health Organization and the United Nations have issued guidance and policies on involuntary commitment, mostly that you shouldn't do it, and the US system just completely ignores the international legal context and guidance and the expertise of the World Health Organization and the expertise of the United Nations and a treaty or two to which the US is a party, and a treaty to which the US is not a party, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so then I think it was Deb and also Vanessa Ramos at Disabilities California too introduced me to some other people and invited me to join PARR, I think, and then also invited me to join this other group that was forming, which is the All People's Health Collective, which is a group that isn't all peers. It's a group drawing people who opposed Care Court together from a bunch of different perspectives and fields. So we have people who worked as public defenders. We have people who've been doing organizing around criminalization for a long time, trying to stop policing for a long time. For some folks from Disabilities California, some folks from other places, who are all kind of together as individuals to advocate for a world where people are healthiest when their fundamental needs are met and safest when everyone has housing, community, health, and purpose, and really argue against these kinds of false solutions that substitute involuntary measures for adequate housing and funding and resources for everybody. So so I started organizing with them too. And then check and make sure I'm okay in time. All right. And then and then we started working on some very specific bills. Senate Bill 43, which expanded the definition of grave disability, which in that part of the law is the qualifying criterion for conservatorship and the qualifying criterion for a lot of the involuntary system. I particularly was enraged by a bill, Senate Bill 1184, that attempted to do away with second Reese hearings. So this kind of gets into the nitty gritty, but and also a content warning for kind of descriptions of, if you want to tune out for a couple minutes, descriptions of forced treatment and involuntary medication. So basically Reese hearings, basically from 1967 until about 1989, if a hospital put you on involuntary hold, they also assumed they had the authority to force medication at the doctor's discretion. And then in 1989, Eleanor Reese won her case, saying that actually, no, just because you're on involuntary hold, that does not mean that a hospital has the right to force medication. They have to have a separate set of hearings on a separate set of facts, and it's at a higher evidentiary standard. So you cannot presume that someone is incompetent to refuse meds just because they're on an involuntary hold. And that's been the law in California since 1989. So what this bill wanted to do is, since that ruling, California has been gradually adding more and more involuntary holds. So what they wanted to do is say that the first Reese hearing on that first hold would last through all the subsequent holds, right? They wouldn't have to go back. The psychiatrist in the hospital wouldn't have to go back and get another Reese hearing. For example, if you move from like a 5250, which is that 14-day hold, to like a 5270, which I think is a 30-day, I don't remember. So like when moving from one hold to another, they wanted to say that the Reese hearing holding would carry over, which doesn't make sense constitutionally, because your right not to be forcibly medicated is actually more protected than your right not to be on a hold. So, so we fought that bill really hard. We didn't quite kill it, but we got a lot of amendments. We got some amendments into it, so we did preserve that second Reese hearing. But yeah, it's been a struggle. And then also, I worked with Paul on Prop 1. I feel like Paul underrepresented his involvement in Prop 1. Paul was like driving that anti-Prop 1 campaign, and we were so close, and we almost won. So just huge credit to Paul on that one. And Emily did a ton of work on it too, by the way. I know Emily hasn't spoken yet, but yeah, let's see, what is the other? What else do I want to cover? Yeah, those are most of the peer advocacy activities I've been doing. We're currently advocating against a new set. There's another seven involuntary, every legislative session, there's another flood of involuntary / coercive bills, right? Often because legislators think that involuntary treatment and coercions will be solutions for the housing crisis, which we know from very good research by, for example, Margaret Kushel at UCSF is not true. Like the way to solve the housing crisis is with housing, generally, affordable housing. But yeah, here we are. So I do advocacy because the other thing I would say is one person can make a difference. I have been shocked at how much difference one person can make, even in terms of like killing a bill, right? Like even in terms of, and at the same time, relationships are kind of everything. So I feel like everything I've done that people are like, oh, like that people have like liked or that's, you know, made a difference has been in collaboration with other people. Like even, for example, like we published an op-ed in the Disability Visibility Project against Proposition 1 that got a lot of play. And like that only happened because I mean, like 10 people helped me edit it. And then, you know, my advisor at Berkeley, Sonara Taylor, like knew Alice Wong and, you know, reached out to her. I was like, wait, we really want to get this published and we can't find a newspaper to take it. And so like so much happens relationally. So I wouldn't be afraid of, I mean, I'm not saying I have anything figured out in terms of how to do advocacy. I'm still trying to figure out how to stop these bills, but I wouldn't be afraid of both, you know, like trying to find your people, trying to find people who believe in you and you believe in them and you're working with the same values and toward the same goal. And also, don't be afraid to build power. Like, I think, like, if you have, like, what skill set do you want to develop you know, to bring to the movement. Like I feel like the movement needs all different kinds of people and different kinds of roles, like, you know, journalists, lawyers, researchers, clinicians, peer advocates, right? It's just writers, like just all kind, like any kind of skill set or expertise becomes extremely valuable in advocacy, and we need it all. So I think that's the end of my time. So thank you so much, everybody. I'll pass it to Robin and Emily.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie. And Katie and Paul were both very crucial and prominent advocates in the fight against Proposition 1, which changed the Mental Health Services Act into the Behavioral Health Services Act and cut a lot of the funding to peer-run organizations and switched it over to providing services for people with substance use disabilities and also for housing interventions. Anyhow, so now we're going to hear from Emily, who's going to share with us some about her personal experience in advocacy work. So Emily, you can go ahead.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me, Disability Rights California. I actually used to serve on your PARR advisory board a long time ago before I burnt out. And then part of my years in the last 10 years have been dedicated to helping cats because in my mind, I got so burnt out and compassion fatigued after being tokenized by the mental health care system. I'm like, in my mind, I literally thought, F you guys, as in humans, I'm going to help the cats instead. I had that much disappointment in humans that I was like, I'm just gonna go help animals because humans can be quite disgusting. And I had to learn that the hard way through my own 5150 caused by 988 after having been a mental health advocate for over 10 years. And it's just like, what? Like, I used to be the hashtag lady in green. And, you know, after my dad died, I basically turned rainbow. I rainbowified myself because this is my coping skill for dealing with the absurdities of this world. Just like after being charged over $3,000 by Pfizer to after being kidnapped by my local fire department and then the police department saying, I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but do you know you're being 5150'd? And I'm like, wait, I went home after, I was so glad to go back home alive after my 5150, and I did my research to see that, wait, those cops are not even following the law and what's written in the law of how you conduct a 5150, what words are read to you. Like how cops normally read Miranda rights to individuals they think could be accused of something. It's like, where is the due process? Where is the person who can make sense of this whole situation? Why are we being incriminated for crying in public and having a meltdown when after calling 988, the National Suicide Hotline, and the crisis counselor from Sacramento, can't handle talking to me for 90 minutes and then decides to say to me, oh, you see a security guard? Please hand your phone over to the security guard, who then called 911 on me. Like, that was the most regretful action that I had when they decided to do that to me, to break confidentiality. And it's just like, And then the resident advisor at the entrance of the ER, no, not resident advisor, she was a student doctor, a resident doctor. She says, oh, you have to give us verbal consent to withdraw your blood, to draw your blood, and or else you're gonna sit here for the next 72 hours here at the entrance, which I don't think is right. I don't think that's the words they're supposed to say. You know, it wasn't like, oh, hi, my name is, so this is what's happening. There was no orientation. I literally had to call my very good friend whom I knew had been in involuntarily hospitalization before to ask them, can you tell me what happens? Because I'm really confused. And I don't know what the heck is going on. And so to cope with this anxious situation, I'm going to use my phone while I didn't know my phone was going to be taken away from me by a bitch nurse. Sorry, excuse my French, but you know, like my phone was taken away from me in the ER. I specifically asked, I would like to see why you took away my phone. Can you give it to me in writing? Why you took away my phone? The nurse would not give it to me. And then, you know, the next day morning, when my husband came to visit me, she asked me, that cruel nurse, she's like, oh, do you want your breakfast anymore? I had eaten some of it already. She did not wait for my answer. And she just threw away my breakfast and she said, you're going to get your lunch soon enough after. What the heck? And then she tries to make small talk and she says, oh, so what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a suicide prevention advocate. And then she says, and what are you doing here? What the F? I'm like, okay, time to make my own show. Hey, Jack Nicholson, where are you? We need to do take 2 of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest because nothing has effing changed in the system. After I got my records from USC Arcadia Hospital, it was so traumatizing to look at those records because the second time I looked at them, I'm like, wait, what? What? Those nurses gave me medication without my consent? How? Did they give me a pill and pretend that, yo, it's just pain medication for your headache or your migraine headache? What? So this is what I often say now. I'm like, if elder abuse is a crime, patient abuse should also be a crime. And what psychiatric survivors and rape survivors have in common, and there's no consent. There's no consent. This is a specific crack in the system that you can lose your civil rights in a friggin' instant when you are by yourself and you have no advocates next to you. And everyone around you, all those male first responders, not to stereotype men for lacking empathy. Well, I understand first responders have their own busy job. They don't have expertise in this field. But where is the unarmed crisis response? Without guns? I mean, literally, I was scared. I was like, I have the choice between trying to walk home from the hospital because I was kind of resistant to going in. I did not give them consent to draw my blood. And then like, I gave in because I wanted to see if they would treat me nicely or if you know, to see what the system was like. And then when I finally went through 50 hours of it and then got transferred to Kaiser Mental Health Center on College Street, and when they transferred me there, I felt like I was going into a jail. Like, what the F? I'm like, this world has been upside down even before Trump became president again. How can society allow for this type of behavior to traumatize individuals who are just having suicidal ideation, but, you know, are not actually saying that I want to kill myself? Like, I have a plan. There's a difference. And but yeah, it's telling my story, you know, triggers me, but at the same time, it's just like, okay, advocacy is hard, so I indulge in my art. You know, it's like I have to protect my peace. I have to remind myself of messages like these. Challenges are what make life interesting. Overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. So it's almost like, you know, all these colors I surround myself with. I actually have an art show at the SGV LGBTQ Center in El Monte right now, and it's I have some pieces there that are yin and yang, you know, and it says, take the good with the bad. You cannot have the highs without the lows. And you know, I like to feel my emotions, because sometimes, yeah, roller coasters can be kind of interesting, but you know, it's like, but when it's just too much, it's like, huh, what the heck, world? It's very interesting, because I used to be part of after I did the 2009 Miss Taiwan pageant and became Taiwan Goodwill Ambassador. This is my sash. I had learned about the Taiwanese independence movement and how there were many human rights abuses that had happened in my parents' country, where they were born. And my grandparents lived under Japanese rule. My parents lived under Chinese Nationalist Party rule, because they lost to Mao Zedong in the Chinese Civil War. And so it's very interesting how, as a Taiwanese American, I have learned about the US civil rights movement, with Martin Luther King Jr. being my role model since junior high, that I learned about the civil rights movement before I learned about the Taiwanese independence movement. Then, while working with the Taiwanese community, I was emotionally triggered by them, that actually made me go into the mental health movement, and which, when I found my peers, my family outside my family, people I could confide in, I eventually outgrew NAMI after helping them for 10 years. And you know, like, even within 1 month of my 5150, I landed a national speaking engagement with NAMI National, where basically I talked about how I learned how to transmute my emotional pain into art, into beauty, and that it's become my healing, like my own therapy. And I do art shows so that I can show other people, hey, look, life can sometimes feel really shitty sometimes, but you know, I sang this song in Oregon at a Peer Apocalypse conference. And please cut me off if I'm going over time. I have many stories to share. Incubus, they have this song called The Warmth. Don't let the world bring you down. Not everyone here is that effed up and cold. Remember why you came and why you're alive. Remember the warmth. And because sometimes when you're surrounded by people who are lacking compassion and understanding, it doesn't mean that they're the ones that are surrounding you constantly. That is why I always tell people as a support group facilitator, find your family outside your family. And someone claims that William Gibson said this quote, but he said, before you diagnose yourself with depression, make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. Sorry for all the cursing, but
Emily, I hate to break in. I just wanted to say we only have a few more minutes left, but you have a really powerful story. And
sorry.
thank you for sharing all that. Can you tell us a little bit about your advocacy work with the National Coalition of Mental Health Recovery and
Yeah, thank you.
PARR and so on?
Yes. Okay. So I had the lovely ability of being part of CAP 1, the California's against Proposition 1 with Paul and Katie. So I'm so blessed to be on this panel with them. And that's like my state level advocacy. And then when I got on the board of the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, who was part of all of the alternatives conferences that existed before with the support of SAMHSA funding, I was privileged to sit on the board as the first Asian board member for this organization of people everyone with lived experience. And last year it was actually quite sad that I was the only Asian, and I did talk a long time, a little bit, went over my time, but the reason why I did so and had to explain to the president a few months after was that I didn't talk over my time to be rude. I talked over my time because there are many people who are afraid of filing grievances about their own 5150s or involuntary hospitalizations. And so I don't only represent myself as a person of color, as a marginalized group that often does not seek out supports to get help for their emotional struggles, because we're supposed to swallow our pain, be seen and not heard while growing up as children of immigrant parents who want us to just deal and not cry in public. So ever since I found the peer movement on the state level, local, state, and federal, and recently just heard of the Global Mental Health Action Network, where two individuals with lived experience who also say nothing about us without us, one person from Indonesia and the other from Australia, are speaking at the United Nations about this very topic. I'm like, wow, it's just like an honor to be Facebook friends with these two people, because that's like goals. I've gone to DC with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, but this group does not recognize peers so strongly. And our voice just doesn't feel like it matters because they're still so only want to showcase the clinicians, so Nelson Mandela said, I never lose. I either win or I learn. So I will keep on learning, to to swim in this area of advocacy and cope through art as a way to balance my heavy energy while doing advocacy in this work. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I could go on and on, but yeah, I want to respect the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, you have a lot of stories to tell. Thank you for sharing some of them. So thanks to all our panelists. I've really enjoyed working alongside of you and advocating with PARR. Now we'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the audience. So if you're on a computer, you can raise your hand by clicking on reactions at the bottom of your screen. Then click on raise hand. Once you're done, you can click lower hand. If you're joining us on your phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. So we'll open up to comments.